The art center soon became more than just a place to paint. It turned into a small home for people who had nowhere else to go, not just physically but in their hearts. There were no rules about talent or experience. Anyone could walk in, pick up a brush, and leave a piece of themselves on the canvas. Amelia often said that paint didn't just cover walls, it opened them. Every morning she unlocked the doors early, even before the sun fully rose. The light would stream through the windows and she would take a deep breath, feeling grateful for the quiet. Then the day would begin. Soft footsteps, laughter, and the smell of coffee mixing with paint. The center filled with stories. There was a man who had lost his job and came in just to sit and draw small shapes day after day. There was a woman who painted flowers because they reminded her of her mother's garden. There were children who used colors to speak what words couldn't say. Amelia never corrected them, never told them how to paint. She only told them to keep going no matter what. Let your heart do the work, she would say. She taught them what she had learned the hard way, that sometimes life breaks everything you build, but it can never take away what lives inside you. Months turned into years, and the art center became well known in the community. Local schools brought students to visit. Journalists came to write about how art could heal people, but Amelia stayed humble. She still wore the same old paint-stained apron and kept her hair tied back as she always had. She never forgot where she started, that tiny shelter room with the children and their broken crayons. One morning, as she was sorting through supplies, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You still make miracles with color," it said softly. She turned around and froze. It was Daniel. He looked older, quieter, carrying a sadness that words couldn't hide. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years between them felt heavy, filled with everything that had been lost. Finally, he said, "I read about what you've done here. I had to see it for myself." Amelia didn't know what to say. There was no anger left in her, only understanding. She simply nodded and said, "Would you like to see the paintings?" He followed her through the rooms. The walls were full of colors, stories, and faces. Children's laughter echoed in the background. Daniel stopped in front of one painting, a picture of a single tree growing from cracked ground, full of blossoms. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's about beginning again," she said quietly. He looked at her, guilt in his eyes. "I never thought you'd come this far. I gave up too soon," she smiled gently. "We all have moments when we lose ourselves. I did too." There was no bitterness in her voice. She had made peace with the past. He stayed for a while, helping arrange paints and clean brushes. They didn't talk about the fire or the years apart. It wasn't needed. When he left later that evening, he thanked her for letting him see what she'd built. After he walked away, Amelia stood by the window, watching the sky turn golden. There was no sadness in her heart, only calm. Some endings didn't need words. As the months passed, the art center grew. Donations came in, allowing her to hire teachers and expand into nearby towns. Soon, there were small art workshops in schools, hospitals, and shelters. Her idea had become something bigger than she ever dreamed. One day, a young girl came into the center with her mother. The child was shy and barely spoke. She had been through something painful, and her mother hoped painting might help. Amelia sat beside her and handed her a brush. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "Just start wherever you feel." The little girl dipped her brush into blue paint and began to move her hand slowly across the paper. By the time she finished, she had painted a small sunrise. Amelia looked at it and smiled. "It's beautiful," she said. The girl nodded. "It's a new day," she whispered. Those words stayed with Amelia long after they left. It's a new day. That night she sat in her studio long after everyone had gone home. The air was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. She looked at the blank canvas in front of her, the biggest one she had ever owned. She thought about everything that had happened. The fire, the loneliness, the shelter, the children, the colors that had brought her back to life. Slowly, she began to paint. She painted the sea again like she had years ago, but this time it wasn't dark or stormy. It was calm and endless, with the first light of morning breaking across the water. In the distance, she added a small figure standing on the shore, holding a brush in her hand. Around her, the wind carried streaks of color, gold, pink, and soft blue, like hope itself spreading through the air. When she finished, she stepped back and smiled. It was the story of her life captured in one image. She named it The Gift. The next morning, she hung it in the center's main room. Everyone who walked in stopped to look at it. Some cried quietly, others simply smiled. A few weeks later, the painting caught the attention of a national art foundation. They offered to showcase it in a major exhibition about art and healing. Amelia agreed, not because she wanted fame, but because she wanted the message to reach more people, that even in loss, there is always something left to give. When she attended the exhibition, she stood among hundreds of visitors, watching them look at her painting. A woman beside her said softly, "It feels like peace." Amelia smiled. "That's what it is," she whispered. As she walked through the gallery, she saw her reflection in the glass, older, wiser, but content. She realized she had become the person she had always wanted to be, not just an artist, but someone who used her gift to make others see light again. When she returned home that evening, she sat by the window of her little room. The silver bracelet, the one shaped like a paintbrush, still rested on her table. It was blackened and bent from the fire, but she had never thrown it away. She picked it up and turned it in her hand, watching it catch the glow of the setting sun. It no longer reminded her of pain. It reminded her of everything she had survived. Outside, the sky turned orange and pink. She could hear faint laughter from the art center below, the sound of people living, painting, healing. She smiled to herself. She had once lost everything, her home, her love, her art. But what she didn't lose was the part of her that could still see beauty in the world. That small light had guided her through every dark moment, and now it was shining brighter than ever. Before going to bed, she walked over to the big painting one last time. She touched the edge of the canvas gently and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, she opened the doors to the art center again. The children ran in, brushes in hand, ready to paint the day's new story. The room filled with laughter and colors, and Amelia felt her heart swell. She no longer needed anything else, not fame, not fortune, not even answers. She had her gift, and that was everything. The weeks after the newspaper story felt different for Amelia. She had not expected anyone to care about her drawings. Yet strangers began sending letters to the shelter. Some wrote to thank her for bringing color into a dark place. Others said her story gave them hope to start again after their own losses. She read each note carefully, surprised that her quiet little world had somehow reached beyond those shelter walls. But for Amelia, it was never about being known. It was about feeling alive again. Every morning she walked to the shelter with a small smile, her steps lighter than before. She would greet the children, roll up her sleeves, and paint with them until their laughter filled the room. Soon, the shelter walls became a living story. One room showed a giant tree with branches that held portraits of the families who lived there. Another wall showed a wide blue ocean with boats sailing toward the sun. Each brushstroke told a piece of someone's journey, their dreams, their pain, their hope. People began to stop by just to see the murals. They'd leave with tears in their eyes or smiles on their faces. Amelia didn't realize it, but her art was healing not just her, but everyone who saw it. One afternoon, while she was cleaning up after the children had gone to lunch, the shelter manager came to her with a soft smile. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Amelia looked up, puzzled. A man stood at the door, tall, wearing a gray coat, holding a small camera. "Hello," he said kindly. "I'm from a local art magazine. We saw your story and wanted to do a small feature on your work here." She hesitated. "Oh, I'm not really doing anything special," she said quietly. He smiled. "I think you are." After a little convincing, she agreed. The man spent the afternoon taking pictures of the murals, the children painting, and Amelia guiding them with gentle patience. Before leaving, he asked, "Do you still paint for yourself?" Amelia paused. "Sometimes," she said. "Not as much as I used to, but maybe I will again soon." The next week, the article came out. It was titled "The Artist of Hope." The pictures showed her surrounded by children smiling with paint on her hands. She didn't see herself as an artist anymore, but the words touched her heart. Soon after, something unexpected happened. A woman visited the shelter asking to meet her. She introduced herself as the owner of a small art gallery in the city, the same one that had once hosted Amelia's first big show years ago. "I remember your paintings," the woman said. "I was heartbroken when I heard about the fire. But I saw this article and I thought, maybe you'd consider showing your new work. Not just what you've lost, but what you've found. Amelia's eyes widened. The idea frightened her. It had been so long since she had stepped into a gallery. I don't have much to show, she said softly. The woman smiled gently. Then start with what you have. That night, Amelia sat in her small room staring at her paints. The thought of painting for an exhibition again made her nervous. But deep down, she knew it was time. She began painting after everyone at the shelter went to sleep. The soft sound of the brush on canvas filled her quiet room. She painted not from memory this time, but from the present. The faces of children who laughed despite hunger. The tired yet brave mothers, the small kindnesses she saw every day. Each night, her tiny room came alive with color. She painted with emotion instead of perfection. Her art wasn't polished like before, but it was true. It showed struggle, warmth, and survival. When she finished her 10th painting, she finally called the gallery owner. The woman arranged a small exhibition in the city. It wasn't grand or fancy, just a quiet evening where people could come and feel. The walls of the gallery were lined with Amelia's new works. The shelter, Hands of Hope, the little crayon. After the rain, each painting told a story, not of pain, but of rising again. On the night of the show, Amelia stood quietly in the corner, just as she had at her first exhibition years ago. But this time felt different. She didn't need praise or applause. She just wanted people to see what love and kindness could rebuild. Slowly, people began to arrive. Some were art lovers, some were families from the shelter, and others were strangers who had read about her story. The room filled with quiet conversations, laughter, and the soft sound of footsteps on the gallery floor. A woman holding her child stopped in front of a painting called The Warm Light. It showed a mother and child standing near a window, light spilling over them. That's us, the woman whispered. Amelia recognized her. She had stayed at the shelter months ago. The woman turned to her, tears in her eyes. You made me believe I could smile again, she said. Amelia didn't know how to reply. She just smiled gently and said, You already had that light. I just painted what was there. By the end of the night, the gallery was full. People bought some of her paintings, but more importantly, they talked about how her art made them feel. Some said it reminded them of hope. Others said it helped them remember their own strength. When the evening ended, the gallery owner came up to her. You've done something special here, she said. This isn't just art, it's healing. Amelia smiled softly. It's not just mine, she said. It belongs to everyone who helped me see again. After the exhibition, she returned to the shelter as usual. She didn't want fame or wealth. What she wanted was purpose. She used the money from her paintings to buy more art supplies for the children. Soon she started holding small art classes for them every weekend. At first, only a few came, but as word spread, more children showed up, some shy, some full of energy. They sat on the floor, covered in paint, laughing and talking as they learned to mix colors and tell their own stories through pictures. Amelia looked around those rooms full of life and thought, this is what art was always meant to be. Months later, she received another letter, this time from a local charity. They wanted to support her idea of opening a small art center for people who had been through hardship, a place where anyone could come to paint, talk, and heal. She couldn't believe it at first. But when she stood inside the empty space they offered her, a bright, airy room with tall windows, she knew it was right. With help from friends, volunteers, and even some of the families from the shelter, she painted the walls herself. On the biggest wall, she wrote in gentle letters, Hope has color. When the art center finally opened, it wasn't fancy. There were mismatched chairs, old tables, and buckets of donated paint. But to Amelia, it was the most beautiful place in the world. People came from everywhere, young and old, happy and broken, curious and afraid. And she welcomed them all. She told them what she had learned, that art wasn't about perfection or fame, but about connection. It was a way to see beauty even when life felt dark. Every night when she closed the center, she would walk home under the quiet sky, tired but peaceful. Sometimes she'd stop by the pier just like she used to. The sea still moved the same way, restless, endless, but now she didn't feel small anymore. She felt part of something larger, something that kept moving forward, just like the waves. She had lost everything once, but through her gift, She had found her way back to life, and had helped others find theirs too. And though she never painted her old home again, she knew now that home wasn't a place made of walls or windows. It was wherever love and purpose lived, and for Amelia that was enough. Winter came slowly that year. The air turned sharp and the town felt quieter than ever. The sea was rough, the skies stayed gray, and the wind carried a chill that went straight to the bones. Amelia spent most of her time alone in the small room she had rented. The walls were bare, the furniture old, and the window leaked cold air, but it was all she could afford. Every morning she woke up early out of habit, though there was no reason to rush anywhere. She'd sit by the window with a cup of tea staring at the world outside. People hurried along the street, wrapped in scarves, faces hidden behind the steam of their breath. They looked like they belonged somewhere. She didn't. Her hands, once steady and confident, now felt useless. She hadn't touched a brush since the fire. Sometimes she'd dream of painting again, but when she woke, guilt and sadness flooded her. How could she paint after everything she'd lost? How could she create beauty when her own life had turned to ashes? One morning she went to the community board at the corner cafe, hoping to find a small job. She didn't care what kind. She just needed to keep her mind busy. Among the handwritten notes and faded flyers, one caught her eye. It said volunteers needed at the city shelter. Help with meals, cleaning, or activities for children. She hesitated for a moment, then tore off one of the tabs with the number. That evening she called. A woman with a warm voice answered and told her she could start any time. The next day, Amelia went to the shelter. It was an old building with cracked walls but kind faces inside. The smell of soup and freshly baked bread filled the halls. Children ran through the corridors laughing, while tired mothers sat nearby holding babies or sorting through donated clothes. Amelia was nervous at first. She felt like she didn't belong, but the other volunteers welcomed her with smiles. She started by helping in the kitchen, then folding clothes and reading to the kids. The work was tiring, but something about being there made her feel lighter. Like her sadness wasn't the only one in the world. Days turned into weeks. The routine helped. She didn't think about painting anymore. She didn't think about what she had lost. She just worked, quietly and steadily. But every now and then, when she saw the children drawing with broken crayons on scraps of paper, she felt a small ache in her chest. One rainy afternoon, she was helping serve lunch when a little girl tugged at her sleeve. The child couldn't have been older than 6. She had big, curious eyes and was holding a torn coloring book. "Can you draw for me?" the girl asked softly. Amelia froze. She hadn't expected that. She opened her mouth to say no, to explain that she wasn't an artist anymore, but the girl was already handing her a crayon. It was dull and worn down, the paper wrapping torn away. Amelia looked at it for a long moment, then slowly knelt beside the child. "What do you want me to draw?" she asked gently. The little girl smiled. "My cat. He's gone, but I miss him." Amelia's heart tightened. She took the crayon, and for the first time in months her hand began to move. The lines came slowly at first, shaky and unsure, but then memory took over. She drew soft fur, little paws, bright eyes. The girl watched silently, then whispered, "That looks just like him." Amelia smiled faintly, feeling something warm stir inside her. She hadn't realized how much she missed that feeling, the quiet peace that came when she drew something true. After that day, the children began to gather around her whenever they saw her. "Draw me! Draw my mom! Draw our dog!" they'd shout. And each time she'd sit on the floor with them, surrounded by crayons and laughter. At first she told herself it was just for them, a small thing to make the kids happy. But deep down she knew it was more than that. Each drawing she made brought her a little closer to herself again. It reminded her that her gift hadn't burned in the fire. It was still there, hidden beneath the ashes of her pain. One evening, the woman who ran the shelter noticed the colorful papers taped along the wall. Drawings of families, pets, flowers, and smiling faces. "Who made these?" she asked. "The kids," Amelia said quietly. The woman smiled. "They're beautiful. You've brought joy to this place." Amelia felt her cheeks warm. It had been a long time since anyone said something kind like that to her. As weeks passed, she began using bits of leftover cardboard and paper to make larger drawings. Soon she painted a small mural in the shelter's playroom, a bright field of flowers under a blue sky. The children helped, laughing as they smeared colors with their hands. For the first time since the fire, Amelia laughed too. It felt strange but good. People began noticing the change in her. Her eyes had life in them again. She still lived simply, still in the small room, still alone, but something had shifted inside her. The silence that once filled her days now had moments of color and sound. One afternoon, a local journalist visited the shelter to write a piece about their community work. She noticed the mural and asked who painted it. The shelter manager pointed to Amelia. The journalist approached her later. "Your work is beautiful," she said. "Would you mind if I wrote about it?" Amelia hesitated, unsure. She didn't want attention. But the woman explained that the story might inspire others, people who had lost everything but still found ways to give back. After a long pause, Amelia agreed. A week later, the story appeared in the newspaper under the headline, "From Ashes to Art, How One Woman Found Hope Through Helping Others." When Amelia saw it, she didn't feel pride. She felt peace. People she hadn't spoken to in months reached out with kind words. Some even offered her old art supplies. One day, a package arrived at the shelter, a box filled with brushes, paints, and a note that read, "Keep creating. The world needs your colors." That night, she sat alone in her room, staring at the box. Her fingers brushed over the brushes gently. She hadn't realized how much she missed the feeling of holding one. Slowly, she set up a small space near the window. She didn't have a real canvas, so she used a piece of cardboard. She dipped the brush into paint, took a deep breath, and began to move her hand. The strokes were slow at first, but soon they flowed like they used to. She painted the shelter, the children, the laughter, all the light she had found again. When she finished, she sat back and looked at the picture. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was real. That night, she finally slept without nightmares. The next morning, she returned to the shelter. The kids ran to her as usual, laughing and shouting her name. She knelt down, hugging them all. Her heart felt full. Not because life was easy again, but because she was living with purpose. She had lost her home, her husband, and everything she once thought defined her. But she had rediscovered something deeper, her gift, and the way it could touch others. And though she didn't know what the future would hold for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to face it. The silence that had once surrounded her was now filled with laughter, color, and hope, and that was enough. The months after the exhibition were full of light for Amelia. Her paintings had touched many hearts, and people began recognizing her in town. Orders came in from nearby cities, and the gallery owner wanted to feature her work again later that year. For the first time, she felt like her dreams were finally becoming real. She spent her mornings in the studio, her hands covered in paint, soft music playing in the background. Daniel would come home tired from the docks, but proud of her. Sometimes he'd stand behind her as she painted and say, "You're really doing it. You're showing the world who you are." She'd smile and kiss his hand, feeling grateful for his support. But life, as it often does, began to change quietly. At first, she didn't notice. The signs were small. Daniel coming home a little later than usual. The silence during dinner stretching longer, his eyes distant when she spoke. She told herself it was just work stress. They'd been through worse before. One evening, a storm rolled in from the sea. The rain came down hard, drumming against the windows. Amelia was in her studio, adding the final touches to a painting she called Home. It was a picture of their small house, with the light from the windows shining out into the dark. She wanted it to remind people that warmth and safety could exist even in storms. When Daniel came in that night, soaked from the rain, he didn't speak much. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep could fix, but something deeper. She asked if everything was okay, and he simply nodded, forcing a smile. She didn't push him. She believed love could hold people together, even in silence. The next morning, she woke up early to make breakfast. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled clean. She stepped outside for a moment just to breathe it in. That's when she noticed something strange. The faint smell of smoke in the distance. It wasn't strong, just a hint carried by the wind. She thought it was from someone's fireplace and went back inside. She didn't know that later that day. That smell would become her worst memory. It started small, a flicker of orange light near the kitchen window. She thought it was sunlight at first, but when she turned, she saw the smoke. It was rising fast, curling up from the corner of the room where a faulty wire had sparked. Her heart jumped. She ran for water, shouting Daniel's name, but the flames spread faster than she could move. The fire caught the curtains, then the tablecloth. Within minutes, the whole room was filled with thick black smoke. The air grew hot, choking her lungs. She tried to save what she could, her paintings, her brushes, anything, but the fire was too strong. She grabbed her phone, calling for help, her hands trembling. When Daniel ran in from outside, his face went pale. He pulled her out just as part of the ceiling started to collapse. They stood on the street, barefoot and shaking, watching everything they owned burn. The heat from the flames hit their faces, and the air was filled with the sound of sirens and breaking glass. Amelia could barely breathe. The house she had painted in so many times, the place she had built her dreams around, it was all turning to ash right before her eyes. When the fire trucks finally put it out, there was nothing left but smoke and ruins. The studio, her paintings, her sketches, and gone. Even the gift, her favorite painting from the exhibition, had been destroyed. She stood there in silence, tears mixing with the soot on her cheeks. That night, they stayed with a friend. Amelia couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at her hands. They were scratched and blistered from trying to save her work. She felt empty, as if the fire had burned through her heart as well. In the days that followed, things only got harder. The insurance company refused to cover the full damage, claiming they hadn't renewed part of their policy on time. They received a small amount, barely enough for basic needs. Amelia thought they could rebuild slowly, but Daniel didn't see it that way. He grew distant, quieter each day. One evening, as they sat in silence, he said softly, "Maybe this is a sign. Maybe we're meant to start over somewhere else." His voice sounded strange, not comforting but uncertain. Amelia looked at him confused. "Start over where?" "This is our home." He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "I can't do this anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke. She stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" He looked down. "I can't rebuild. I don't have the strength. Everything's gone and I just can't stay." Her throat tightened. "But we still have each other," she said. He shook his head, eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry." That night he packed a small bag and left. No fight, no shouting, just silence. Amelia sat on the floor after he was gone, surrounded by ashes and memories. She couldn't cry anymore. It felt like the tears had burned away too. Days turned into weeks. The townspeople were kind. They brought her food, clothes, small things to help. But nothing could replace what she'd lost. Her art supplies were gone, her home was gone, and now Daniel was gone too. She rented a small room above a repair shop and tried to find work, but everything felt meaningless. Sometimes she would walk to the old pier where she used to sketch. She'd sit there for hours watching the waves crash against the rocks. The sea that once inspired her now looked cold and endless. She felt small, invisible. Her gift, the thing that had once given her purpose, felt like a cruel reminder of what she no longer had. People told her to paint again, to heal through her art. But how could she? Every time she picked up a brush, she saw the fire. She saw the flames swallowing her paintings, the life she built, the person she used to be. One afternoon, while cleaning her small room, she found a tiny box that had somehow survived the fire. Inside was the silver bracelet Daniel had given her, the one shaped like a paintbrush. It was blackened and twisted, but still recognizable. She held it in her hands, her heart heavy. That night she went to sleep with it beside her bed. She dreamed of colors, reds, blues, yellows, swirling together and disappearing into smoke. When she woke, her pillow was wet with tears. The days grew colder. She stopped talking to people, stopped going out. Her world became smaller and smaller until all that was left was the room and her thoughts. She told herself she had nothing left. Not her home, not her husband, not her art. But deep down, something faint still stirred, like a candle flickering in the dark. It wasn't hope yet, just a whisper, something that said, "You still have your hands. You still have your eyes. You still have your gift." She didn't listen at first. She didn't believe it. But that tiny spark would one day become the thing that saved her life. There was once a woman who lived in a small town near the sea. The town was quiet, full of narrow streets, small cafes, and the smell of salt in the air. Every morning she would walk to the old pier with her sketchbook under her arm. Her name was Amelia, and she had a gift. She could paint feelings, not just scenes or faces, but the emotions behind them. the kind of things people couldn't easily say out loud. Amelia had always been that way. Even as a child, she'd sit for hours drawing with bits of charcoal on scrap paper. While other kids ran around, she liked to watch the world, the clouds, the light on the water, the sadness in someone's eyes when they thought no one was looking. She'd capture it all with colors and lines. Her mother used to tell her, "You see the world differently, love. Don't lose that." By the time she grew older, her art had become her world. People from the town would stop by her small studio, a little room above a bakery, to see her paintings. The walls were covered with scenes of life: fishermen at dawn, children playing by the shore, an old woman waiting by the window. There was something about her work that made people stop and feel. Her art wasn't perfect in a technical way, but it was real. It touched people. Amelia had dreams too. She wanted to open her own gallery one day, to fill it with art that told stories of ordinary people. She wanted to make others believe that beauty still existed, even in hard times. Life seemed to smile on her. She had recently gotten married to a kind man named Daniel. He wasn't an artist, but he understood her passion. He often said that her paintings brought light into their home. Together, they moved into a small house by the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had big windows and plenty of space for her canvases. In the morning, sunlight would flood the room where she painted, turning everything gold. Her days were peaceful. She would paint for hours while Daniel worked at the docks. In the evenings, they'd sit by the window watching the sea. They didn't have much money, but they were happy. Or at least it felt that way. Amelia often thought to herself that she finally had everything she needed: love, a home, and her art. Then came the news that changed everything. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a gallery in the city. They had seen her work online and wanted to feature her paintings in an upcoming exhibition. It would be her first big break, the chance to show her art to a wider audience. She could hardly believe it. Her hands shook as she read the letter over and over again. Daniel hugged her, spinning her around in excitement. For the next few weeks, she poured her heart into new paintings. Every brushstroke carried a piece of her story. She painted the sea in shades of blue that looked almost alive. She painted the market full of people, laughter, and color. She even painted her husband, standing proudly with the morning sun on his face. Each canvas was a reflection of everything she loved. Sometimes she'd work late into the night. When she grew tired, she'd look out the window at the moonlight shining over the water and whisper a quiet thank you for the chance to live the life she had always dreamed of. Her friends noticed the glow in her face. They said success looked good on her. But Amelia didn't care about fame or money. What mattered to her was sharing the beauty she saw every day, helping people feel something real. She wanted her paintings to remind others that life, no matter how hard, always carried moments of light. A few days before the exhibition, she and Daniel celebrated with a small dinner. He gave her a simple silver bracelet with a charm shaped like a paintbrush. "For luck," he said, smiling. She laughed and told him she didn't need luck. She had love, and that was enough. The night before the big event, she stayed up late finishing her final piece, a large painting of the sea during a storm. It was powerful and dark, but full of motion and hope. She titled it, "The Gift." To her, it represented the way creativity could survive even through chaos. When she finally stepped back from the canvas, exhausted but proud, she felt something deep inside her shift. It wasn't just excitement. It was gratitude. The kind that makes you want to cry without knowing why. The next morning, she packed her paintings carefully, wrapping each one in brown paper. Daniel loaded them into their small car and they drove to the city together. The streets were busier than she remembered, loud, crowded, alive. The gallery was bright and elegant, full of white walls and glass. She had never seen her art in such a space before. As the staff helped her set up, she felt both nervous and thrilled. People stopped to admire her work as it was being hung, and she overheard words like moving, honest, and raw. Her heart swelled with pride. That evening, the exhibition opened. People came in dressed in suits and dresses, holding glasses of wine and talking softly. Amelia stood in a corner watching them move from one painting to another. She couldn't believe they were all here, for her. Then something beautiful happened. A woman approached her with tears in her eyes. She pointed at a painting of an old fisherman standing alone by the sea. "This reminds me of my father," the woman said quietly. He passed away last year. Thank you for painting this. It feels like he's still here somehow. Amelia didn't know what to say. She just smiled and squeezed the woman's hand. In that moment, she realized that her art truly mattered, not because it was beautiful, but because it made someone feel less alone. The show was a success. Several of her paintings sold that night, and the gallery owner invited her to work on a new collection. Amelia felt like her life had finally taken shape. When they drove home, she leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness. She thought of all the times she had doubted herself, all the nights she had stayed up painting when no one seemed to care, and now it all made sense. Every moment of struggle had led her here. Back at home, she placed her silver bracelet on the table and sat quietly in her studio. The moonlight touched her newest painting, the gift. She smiled softly. For the first time in a long while, she felt complete. She didn't know that this piece wouldn't last. She didn't know that within a few months, everything she loved, her home, her paintings, even her marriage, would be taken from her. But that night, none of it mattered. She was just a woman with a paintbrush in her hand and a world of color in her heart. And though she couldn't see what was coming, her gift, and the one that helped her see beauty in everything, was still there, quietly waiting to guide her through the storm ahead.